society in the West, 1750 to 1914. An important thing to understand about chapter 23 is that it's more of an overview of the entire unit. Some of this stuff we have seen in the previous unit, so it's going to talk about the transition into the age of imperialism and industrialization, and then it's going to kind of more or less set the stage for the rest of the time period from 1750 to 1914, and we're going to look a little bit more in depth about imperialism in the next chapter and a little bit more about industrialization in Russia and Japan in the next few chapters. So we're going to see some of the concepts mentioned in this chapter and some of the other ones in the rest of the unit. So this is more of a good overview of the unit than anything else. So when you're reading it or you already read it and it seems to be a little bit all over the place, just keep that in mind, that it's trying to tie in the concepts of what's happening in the entire world, because really 1750, almost the entire world by then is starting to be connected through trade, through industrialization, through imperialism, and so there's a lot of things being connected. The Age of Revolution, that's where we're going to start out. Forces of change in the Enlightenment. We've talked about the Enlightenment and the ideas that come about from that with democracy and rights and freedoms, and that's going to continue on. Commercialization is going to have a process in this, and so is population growth, as well as medicine increases, as food production increases and aids that process as well. And we'll even look at urbanization in a little bit. The American Revolution, 1775, the outbreak of the revolutions, French aid, new constitution. You guys should be familiar with the American Revolution from 8th grade and understanding that this is one of the first major revolutions. But really the one to look at will be the French revolutions. That's what's going to cause a lot of disruption in Europe, mainly because a lot of European nations and even England didn't know really how long the United States was going to last. Is it going to work out? We might go and recapture that land. So still a little bit up in the air. The idea of democracy, obviously, that was going to be very influential in Europe in the beginning of the French Revolution, but this one really spurs on the revolutions that are going to occur, the fights for independence, the fights for nationalism that we see. Crisis in France in 1789 with the Enlightenment ideas. Louis XVI overspending, his wife overspending, and the Parliament having the Assembly called for the first time in about 150 years. And realizing the lower classes not really having the rights and the votes. They were the majority of the people but had the least influence in Parliament, and therefore you're going to get some, basically some issues that come about. You'll have the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, claiming their rights and their freedoms and the opportunity for their voting. July 14th, they'll storm Bastille for the armaments. Their main principles: abolish serfdom, equality for men. Now you have to remember, not all men were voting yet. So men's suffrage will actually come first. You only had your upper elites and then some privileged, and then really all your farmers really not having that opportunity. The end to aristocratic privilege, church privilege ended. They had a lot of land that they weren't being taxed on and weren't allowed to be farmed by everybody. And then elective parliament. The French Revolution, radical and authoritarian phases. You have your reaction by the church, the aristocrats, and the foreign powers. The radical shift, you have your king executed by the guillotine. The reign of terror by Maximilian, even he himself was not able to escape the guillotine, as he is beheaded as well for going a little bit too far in his steps. 1795, a more moderate government. You have Napoleon, who steps in as authoritarian. Tries to conquer Europe, basically has most of Europe by 1812, runs into Russia in 1815, decides to attack them during the winter, doesn't survive too well for them, and they're defeated. The main thing to get out of that Congress of Vienna in 1815 is going to more or less reestablish the status quo. They're making sure not one nation is going to become more powerful than the other, so they actually don't put too many restraints on France, because they're wanting to make sure they keep the balance of power equal, so you don't see any kind of massive war again, or one nation trying to take over all of Europe like Napoleon did. The new political movements, you have conservatives, liberals, and radicals. Conservatives realizing that if they're going to want to move anywhere, which they were the aristocrats wanting to keep their jobs and their high status and their rights, they were going to need to compromise, and so they compromised a little bit more with the liberals, who wanted more constitutional rule, protection of freedoms, and especially giving more rights to those in the middle class, who were your working class and had a huge influence upon the nations. The radicals, extension of voting rights, going as far as all men's suffrage, the freeing of slavery, the women's suffrage, having their rights as well. Socialism is going to come in some of these areas. We'll see this in Germany and Italy and France a little bit. And of course nationalists, you'll see movements for independence like in the Balkans, with Greece winning independence from the Ottoman Empire. So you'll have more revolutions in the 1820s and the 1830s as well. And of course we'll see another revolution in France in the 1848 and in Germany in 1848 as well. Extensions of male suffrage, Britain and the United States giving men, all males, the right to vote. There's a good overview of the Vienna settlement that I would go ahead and look over on the PowerPoint. Industrialization and the revolutions in 1848. Your lower classes are going to have political actions. Britain's going to go ahead and accommodate a lot of these demands as they're wanting to move forward in their industrialization and not have the consequences of revolutions that you're having in some of these other nations. Revolts in Germany, Austria, and Hungary, again spreading from France in 1848 in February to March in Germany. France, 1848, the monarch is overthrown. And again, some of these goals: liberal constitution, social reform, the end of serfdom, women's rights, ethnic demands. So some of those ideas of the liberals and radicals coming in a little bit more during these revolutions. The Industrial Revolution beginning in Britain. Again, there's an overview for it. One of the main reasons that Britain is so successful is they have all the natural resources. They're an island, and so there's a lot of there's a little bit quicker communication. There's your riverways that you have for transportation. There's all the natural resources for coal and mining that are going to be accessible, and then Britain even itself is going to clamp down on letting these ideas spread, so they stay in Britain and they're able to start their industrialization and their process. The industrials of industrial life, families are going to change. Birth and death rates are going to go down. And that is from the beginning to the end. There are going to be ups and downs in it as you see industrialization pick up, and more people will have injuries in the workforce before they have building codes where entire blocks would burn down and buildings would fall down. You would have you wouldn't have railings around your heavy machinery. So women and children would fall into those and be killed. And so there were some ups and downs, but overall from the beginning to the end, as things increase, such as your hygiene getting better, the understanding of sewage and waste being distributed correctly. So there's some ups and downs in there where things are pretty rough during the industrialization, but by the end of it, your birth and death rates will be down from 1750 to 1914. You will have a lot of labor movements during this time period, improving the working conditions, improving the working hours, the age of the workers, as they would have 8-year-olds mining and working with heavy industry, which is kind of unthinkable today. Rural cooperatives as well, so aiding in the agricultural area. Here are your major areas on the map. England, obviously, beginning with most of it. Up in your Manchester, Liverpool, Shields, Leeds, Newcastle, obviously London, and of course their railroad system as well, connected so well. And the one thing to note is that the United States will pretty much, because of Britain putting a lot of restrictions on trade with them, will end up establishing themselves on their own. Now, of course, a few ideas are going to spread over there, but they will, for the most part, develop separately from Europe. Political trends and the rise of new nations. 1850, leaders learned to adopt change. We'll see this in England and in France and in Prussia, which was controlling most of Germany during that time period. Nationalism, again, coming up especially big with the German unification and the Italian unification, which here's Italy and their unification process from 1815 to 1860. By 1870, you have your full unification of that area. A lot of that established during the Congress of Vienna with the Piedmont area given a lot of control in the north. The unification of Germany in the beginning of its industrialization with Prussia. The Italian and German unification, again, there's a timeline here for you as well to help you with that. The social question and new government functions. You have your social system being with schools being established. Literacy rate is going to increase as well. Welfare, health, old age, and so dealing with some of those things that are going to come about, taking care of the elderly as the life expectancy slowly starts to creep up, as well as medical things increase, hygiene increases, awareness of health increases. Your labor movements are going to help with that as well, because you're having the death rate go down in some of those industries where it had started to go up. Social reform becomes key political issue. Socialism with Karl Marx. We're going to look at this a little bit deeper with Russia and talk about it a little bit more in depth. Again, this is why this chapter is a big overview here. But just note that socialism in Germany, Austria, France in the 1880s. Women will also gain the right to vote in many countries during this time period, so women's suffrage becoming something of importance as well. The emphasis on consumption and leisure. This is important to understand that with the industrialization, especially for the upper middle class and your upper elites who are going to own a lot of the industries and a lot of the larger farms, are going to have the opportunity for more pleasure. You're going to have major consumerism in the products that are being developed, because a lot of these industries are going to have byproducts that in themselves become industries as well. So there's a lot of consumerism. This is the time period where you see JCPenney, Sears, Montgomery Ward. That might be dating myself a little bit there, as we don't really see those. But a lot of your bigger clothing industries starting to be established during this time period. Cars coming about towards the end of this time period. Newspapers, entertainment with plays and movies coming towards the end of this. Vacations, something of a large opportunity as well, and that becomes an industry in itself. Leisure as a commodity, team sports, travel industry with the vacations. And so there's a need to get away from the busy life that had started to occur. And so pleasure is something that comes about during this age. Advances in scientific knowledge as well, rationalism, Darwinism comes about with the evolution. Einstein and relativity with your time is going to come about. Social sciences, science applied to human life, so you're getting psychology involved here with Freud and his developments of the mind. So a lot of advancements are going to happen in such a short time period that where we studied large time periods before with the classical and post-classical, and even to a degree the early modern, a lot of things just come about very, very fast during this time period. Also, art is going to change. You'll have romanticism opposed to the rationalism beforehand. You're going to have human emotion being shown in a lot of these paintings, from everything from joy to sadness, the heart. And you'll also see a lot of the leisure life being painted as well. Split between artists and scientists as well. So you'll have that rational thought with science, the romanticism with your arts. Industrialization makes the West more powerful, impact, improved transportation, communication. As we talked about earlier, a lot of these societies hadn't been adopting the technology, the gunpowder technology, as the Europeans had, and now even with the idea of industrialization and heavy industry with better ships and military, they're taking even several more leaps ahead of a lot of these other nations. And we'll see this in the next chapter with imperialism. The American Civil War also spurs on industrialization in the United States with their heavy industry, with railroads and transportation, as they're fighting each other as well. Your major trading routes and connection of the global world network during that time period. People of heavy immigrants into Canada, Australia, and New Zealand You're going to have some political advancements, economic and cultural patterns that are start to occur. Canada is going to see the federal system. Australia, you'll have your gold rush and agricultural developments. We'll see a little bit more of New Zealand and in Canada and Australia in the next chapter with imperialism. And the rise of Germany with Bismarck unsettles the balance of power. We're going to talk about this again as this leads into World War I at the end of this unit. European global expansion, Latin America becoming independent. That's in chapter 25, which you read over the Christmas break. Africa controlled by Europeans. We'll see this in the next chapter. China and the Middle East, we'll see this in a few chapters at the end of this unit as well, with the zones of European rivalry, especially in the Pacific. The new alliances, your triple alliance, triple entity by 1907. Again, we'll look at this in another chapters leading into World War I. The instability with the revolutions that are occurring, specifically with the Ottoman Empire and its struggles. And we'll see the beginning of, with assassinations of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. We'll, again, this is a big overview. We'll see this again when we look at World War I a little bit more. Major European cities in 1914 with their population increase. This is the first time that you're going to see the population be more in the cities. So urbanization, first time population is going to be higher in cities than it is in the rural areas. And that concludes chapter 23.